So I asked for 5 minutes. I just want to talk about the psychological side. I studied motivation here at Stanford 10 years ago, and I'm interested really in thinking about compliance as a dimension that isn't currently being addressed. What I think of right now is that we're kind of in the Burgess shale of 10,000 technologies and tools, but there is a website that reviews every exercise infomercial, and it seems like the number of things that the quantified self is generating right now resemble that. That the one thing they don't have is the batteries included of the motivation to do the tracking. Second thing that I've noticed, and I think this is not true of some of the talks tonight, but there is what I would call data inuresis. You're inured to the data. There's almost an assumption that dates back to Socrates that if you knew what you were doing, you wouldn't do something that was against your interest. Whereas New York City has, for the last year and a half, posted all caloric information. According to Dan Ariely, who did a study, the effect is very, very close to zero. Dale Larson gave a talk at Quantified Self 13, and I look back and actually he did have some effect of lean scale, so I'm not going to use that as an example, but my recollection was that it didn't have that much impact. Behavioral economists say that we should think of product designers and product managers as choice architects. Everybody who, it's this scale of being where economists want to be architects. I'm an experimental psychologist, so, colleagues of mine have passed themselves off as economists. I don't know what God wants to be, maybe a hedge fund manager. So motivational context is what we need to think about. I really don't believe in gamification qua something that you just slap on there. There are dimensions that I'll talk about, but it's not really true that you can just gamify something. I also believe that integrating psychology with technology will parallel the GUI that transformed the homebrew computer club into things that change people's lives. I'm not going to talk too much more about that, but what I want to talk about is something that social psychologists kind of named 50 years ago, channel factors. The observation was that information and persuasion were rather inert. So once you gave people something that, told them how important it was to do something, and they said, yes, I totally agree, their behavior did not entrain. So there was the World War II sale of bonds, which was done by Cartwright. Then there was another study on tetanus shot messaging. And in spite of the fact that everybody saw the advantages of tetanus shot, the only experimental group that actually got shots were ones who were given a map to the clinic and asked to specify in advance an appointment time. So once this research was kind of understood to be applied, it died in psychology. It just stopped. There isn't like a laundry list of channel factors. There's just like this generic gesture to channel factors exist. Behavioral economics now is inventorying these, and that's one reason to think of myself as a behavioral economist. Well-chosen defaults are an example. Reduction in choice overload is another. There's a lot of things that can manipulate how people think. One thing I want to highlight is that people do not know what they want. If you ask them what they want in the future, you'll have this little battle with your inner selves. This used to be the dynamic with Netflix queues, that you would sign up for a lot of highbrow stuff and then watch a lot of Meg Ryan. So what we need to do is think about automating choice, because concretely decisions extract cognitive load. Subscriptions are one way to reduce the friction of decision making. Theater tickets, gym membership do that. Amazon does it in at least two ways that I can think of. Amazon Prime to prevent you from doing the, what's something that costs $4.82 that will get me free shipping? And the second thing is that you can subscribe to something. I didn't do it when I bought my camera, but I thought, what if I had subscribed and said, send me another camera in 6 months? I have 6 months to cancel that, and they give you a 15% reduction on things that you subscribe to. Medical insurance is another example where it may be irrational to pay up front, but what you're actually saying is, I do not want to, every time I have a medical decision, go through a cost-benefit calculation of whether it's worth it for me to go to the doctor. So people kind of get these package deals and insulate themselves from the extraction of decisions. I think that we need to understand preferences. I would say ELIZA is a model. I don't need to tell people here about ELIZA. If you don't know about it, there's a great Wikipedia page about it, but it was a 66 computer program by Weizenbaum, and people love and still love to talk to Eliza-like bots. How can we get people to reveal things about themselves now? I think Hunch is doing a really good example of that. I've played with Hunch, and there's a lot of people playing with themselves here, and yet I think there's a way in which you could play with a tool that extracts information about your revealed preferences that enables you to then interact with other tools that are tuned to information that you collected on yourself in a game of talk about me. Now, it's true that question and answers can be pesky, and Microsoft Clippy stands as the poster child of something that you don't want. I want to just talk about one psychological fact that this goes back to the beginning of psychology, the Weber-Fechner law of diminishing returns. Basically, this is psychoacoustics, all kinds of things that demonstrate that the first amount of sound registers loudly, but to double the acoustic sensation of sound, you have to actually logarithmically scale up. You have this factor of diminishing returns, and that insulates you against the intensities. Now, one way that you can think of gamifying in terms of leveling, changing that, is that you have this kind of motivational slope that's rather flat. You're thinking, okay, I've got to, I don't know, in the World of Warcraft, grow a butt the size of a sofa. And that just seems too long scale. So instead, you chop it up from milestones into what Chip Heath called inch pebbles. And by structuring things into levels, you take things that are on these long diminished slopes, move it down to this part of the curve, which is steep and has a higher level of reward. So you can think of that as something. The reverse is occurring with subscriptions. Obviously, what happens is instead of you're feeling like each time, gotta make a decision, it says, no, we're way out here, we're on the flat side, it's not gonna cost you. I don't think I have to tell people here about Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Probably everybody knows how to pronounce his name. But his theory of flow beyond boredom and anxiety is highly relevant to thinking about how to embed things so that people are entrained. I did want to just mention this, since Nima was mentioning about the difference between what you are and what you remember. This is a classic example of two people undergoing a painful procedure. The person on the left, A, clearly had, if you integrated pain under the curve, much less pain, because B had all of A's pain plus some. Nevertheless, what Danny Kahneman observed is that we don't actually run an integral that calculates how much pain I've undergone. You can't tell somebody after they've taken a roller coaster what the average height of the roller coaster was. You don't actually have an accounter that's accumulating information like that. Instead, he posited what he called the peak and end rule. So you think of the most intense point and you think of the last point. Because of that, this person who had much more uncomfortable procedure recalled the procedure as less painful, and they were much more willing to undergo the procedure again. So finally, these are the next steps, I think, for the quantified self. The focus on a lot of experiments should be what manipulation can increase compliance with tracking. That should be the dependent variable. There's manipulations that can then evaluate how you time the prompt, what kinds of context you provide. Nima's example of the little faces on the bar is a good one. And what kinds of rewards you get. I also think that data collection will shift from something that's extrinsically imposed to something that's intrinsic. As an example, it's possible if you have certain kinds of monitors to make somebody exhibit a certain behavior before they can proceed. If you imagine your screen goes up and it says, now you have to bring your heart rate up to a level that indicates that you've done at least 5 jump squats. And until you do that, the monitor will not record the behavior that enables you to release the computer from being hijacked. So I think there's all kinds of things that we could think of that impose a natural intervention where you play a hand-eye coordination task, perform an arithmetic operation, or deliver a heart rate change or a breath rate change that would do it. Obviously, people are going to outsmart anything that you impose because they want to get the cookie and they will figure out how to do it without giving the desired behavior. So the dependent variable will still be rate of compliance. I think the gold standard will be when we are delivering an experience that's as motivating as what people get from, say, a Hollywood personal trainer. And there's ways to think about that where, somebody's charged about $250 a month. I belong to a boot camp, and the amount of exercise that I'm extracting from my body is magnitudes more intense than what I can get from myself. As soon as you start to think about that as something that pulls exercise out of me, delivers certain kinds of behavior, you can start to think, okay, how do we structure this so that with 25 cents a month, we get interventions that get similar kinds of behaviors? Thanks for giving me 5 minutes.
11 minutes.
Really? I timed this.
Okay, so we have time for one question, and Ari's going to set up in the meantime. Who has a really great Yes, Robin.
So it sounds to me like what you're talking about is people who do not have motivation, but who want to exchange money for somebody else to impose motivation on them.
Can I just have one of these?
I may be wrong. I'm just thinking that.
Well, I mean, I think the
good thing I'm here.
of obesity and the low levels of exercise and the problems with people who do all kinds of actions that they represent themselves as having a bad consequence over time is the population I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about Americans, okay? There's a joke about sexaholics or people who have sex whenever you think about it, and if you eat every time you think about it, you're an American. So, the thing is, I think there's lots of context for helping people do things that they say they want to do, that they can't get themselves to do. Obviously, as a population, people in the quantified self, your exemplary fan blew me away, the capacity for him to monitor himself. But those are, cutting edge rather than representative of the population at large. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, we're past. Yes, thank you.